Yo, what's up, Blackish fam? I hope all is well in your corner of the world. Man, we're continuing to go in through into Aesop Rock's catalog, and we've done quite a few songs at this point. If you're a fan of Aesop Rock, you like the in-depth breakdowns where we just really kind of bounce ideas around on what he might be referring to and try to break down the lyrics and understand the context. If you're a fan, we have a under lyrics and breakdowns. There's a folder with all of Aesop Rock's the Garbology album, and then we continue going back into his catalog, and we've done so for other artists as well. If you're here to just listen to the song, I always say this might not be the best video for you because we do an in-depth breakdown and we break it down and try to see what other references or what he might be thinking of when he put together something. And as you guys know, if you're fans of Aesop Rock, it can be quite challenging. Man, I gotta say, I have not bumped music back to back in quite some time. And I find myself constantly bumping, dating myself with bumping, Jumping Coffins and which one? Dorks. Man, I just had that, I've had it on repeat and just I get something different each time. But man, I love the beat, I love the flow. It's just so sick, especially after doing a breakdown. This is always the first time I hear a song, so when I listen to it again, I'm like, oh man, that was something we should have referenced. So, man, really excited to get into this one. This is Aesop Rock. This is Rabies, and we found a video that has the lyrics, which always helps when we're breaking down his music. So, hopefully, the lyrics don't send us off like they have in the past. Let me get my ugly mug up out of here. And let's get right into it. This is Rabies. And it sounds like a video game intro or so. Now, and shout out to the comment section, because you guys have told me that I guess this was an album where he moved into the wilderness. I believe you guys have said Oregon, but more of a wild, outdoor, natural environment. And that kind of helped give me some perspective because we were jumping around, right? We did most of Garbology, and then I've been just taking requests. And thanks again, shout out to the comment section of saying that every album is different. There's a different theme. So as we explore this, it's great to have that understanding that I guess he was outdoors when he wrote part of this, and then he transitioned back to I don't want to say suburbia, but we should see that in a lot of his work. So thanks again for the reference. I really appreciate that. I've only started breaking down Aesop Rock within the last year, I'm learning as I go. But a lot of the information I get is through other people that are just more familiar with his work. So thank you again.
Hey, warm cider, barn full of spiders, orange moon, starry night, particle exciters, and a pageant rival.
So it sounds like he's getting right into this. He's in the outdoors, right? Just exactly what we just referenced. Let's let it back. I like his flow in this on this too.
Full of spiders, orange moon, starry night, particle exciters, in a pageant rivaled only by the origin of fire. Now an organism from alternative environs, a dozen paracarp two nights.
Ooh.
A bite gets sliced in a ribbon. I'm here to pick lice of each other and assimilate.
All right, let's get into the breakdown. I like this flow though. That's sick. Let's get right back to the beginning. So I think he referenced here, right here.
Barn full of spiders, orange moon, starry night, particle exciters, in a
so it sounds like he's outside, right? And that's what I love about Aesop Rock. I'm sure different people like different things about his flow, but I like how he puts something in that it could be very general, right? Right? He could be talking about. Well, here, let's listen to this.
Cider. Barn full of spiders, orange moon, starry night, particle exciters, in a pageant rivaled only by the origin of
right. Like, yeah, there's spiders, right? What barn doesn't have spiders? Your house has spiders, right? But bright orange moon, right? That you're not seeing the big city lights, the polluted skies. You can actually see the stars. But I love how he being Aesop Rock, obviously, he references something that. It could be very general, right? He could be talking about the night sky, but I think he's actually talking about one of the most well-known pieces of art, right? That's A Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. a lot of people can reference this, but I guess he could be referencing the poem that the poem has the same name, but regardless, it would be the same origin story, right? Now, Vincent Van Gogh, it's really important to know really the context, and we've seen him do this. And Vincent Van Gogh, this was in the late 1800s. I want to say right before 1900s, but I know it was at least late 18, something in the last decade or two. He was actually in an asylum. You don't really hear that word used anymore unless it's like insane asylum, right? But yeah, he lived good, but it was still a hospital, right? He was allowed more freedom than any other patient. He could leave the hospital grounds. He can paint, but he really struggled. And from my understanding, he was given a studio, but this guy was depressed. He was isolated. The story goes that he had thoughts of suicide, right? He would have this unbelievable paranoia and different fits throughout his life. And he was getting better. And then at some point, he started to just regress, right? He started to transition back to the darker times, his earlier years. And he started incorporating that into his art. So we could see like darker colors, like from the beginning of his career. And with Starry Night, it's just a wonderful example of that shift, right? And supposedly, and we know that Aesop Rock studied, I believe his degree is actually in the arts. But when you look at the painting, right here, let me see if we can do this here. I want to pull up the photo so that you guys have something to reference while I'm talking about this. Just pull up something from the gallery here. So most people know. Now, why is this from Etsy? But you can kind of see this here. Let me see if it's within the frame. This is a Starry Night by Van Gogh, or a variation of that. Now, there's a few things to look at. Now, if you were to look at this from from an art class, right? You're going to obviously recognize right away that blue dominates the painting, right? You can see the blending hills into the sky. There's a little village that lays at the base, right? But each building is clearly outlined. You see the black, the yellow, but obviously the sky, right? That's where your eyes are drawn. That's the attention grabber of the painting. But look at the brush strokes, right? What I remember when I was reading about this is they had a really interesting quote. They said it was bringing nature into the unnaturalness of buildings, and referencing how the buildings have these straight lines and how the night sky looks, right? But there's a few interesting things when we really look at this painting. The interesting thing about this is the painting is entirely from Van Gogh's imagination. Now, a lot of people understand that he was in an asylum and they just assume that this is what he saw looking out his window. But none of the scenery actually matched the view from his window, right? So this was a guy, Van Gogh would always paint exactly what he would see. So this is very different from what you would call his typical work, right? If anything, if that's possible for an artist. But a lot of people relate the Bible. There's a Bible quote in Genesis, and they relate it back to this artwork, right? It basically states that Joseph, he says, something like, I dreamed a dream. And he said that I dream more. I dream of the sun and the moon. But basically, it's supposed to be a prediction that it basically says that one day his family is going to bow for him, right? They're going to see him as more of an authority. And a lot of people associate this quote. They think that it's actually referencing Van Gogh's career, right? A lot of people doubted how successful he would be in art. But they say that he wanted to breathe, he wanted to reference a higher power into his art. He grew up in a religious household. And now, based on my understanding and reading about this work, there supposedly is three different parts to this painting. So we have the sky, right? The sky is supposed to be a representation of what's divine. It's supposed to be dreamlike, right? It's supposed to be unreal. It's supposed to be beyond what you can, beyond what you can reach for. And then you go down one level, and these are the hills, right? The trees are on the ground. You can see them bending and swirling, right? And the last part is the village. Again, we reference the straight lines, right? The angles, and it's supposed to be a separation from the heavens in the sky. So it's actually really interesting. It's supposed to mean Van Gogh is bringing God to the village. So there's a lot of meaning, and I'm sure, just like with Aesop's work, there's so many different ways that you can interpret a Starry Night, just like you can interpret the Mona Lisa. But I always thought that was a really cool interpretation, and the painting means so much more when you actually know that he was in an asylum, and that actually wasn't what he saw out his window. But it's a really interesting piece of art, and we saw this with Aesop Rock, where he was referencing the praying hands, right? And we went into depth about what that meant. A lot of people believe it's praying hands, but it's actually the hands representing that his brother that was sacrificed his own, what would you say, passions in the world so that his brother can go to school and further his career. But in doing so, his brother had to work in a mine to finance that. And the picture is actually a representation of him coming back to allow his brother to go work in the mine, and he can no longer be an artist because his hands are so messed up from the work that he's done and the sacrifice that he did for his brother. So the painting is actually a representation of his broken hands, not of praying hands, but that meaning has changed over time. So again, I think it's no secret. We know that Aesop Rock has studied the arts. And when you do so, there's just a different meaning. Again, we could be talking about a starry night, just looking up, but you could also be referencing that painting. And I apologize for going off. I love art and just interpreting art and the references associated with different things and how people, sometimes things get lost in translation over time. But when you look at the actual meaning behind different things and understanding the artwork, it's just like breaking down lyrics. It's really interesting to me. Run it back! He's that particle exciters. Wasn't that for Star Trek, right?
Warm cider, barn full of spiders. Orange moon, starry night, particle exciters. In a pageant rivaled only by the origin of fire.
Yeah, he's saying the beauty, right? A beauty pageant. He said the pageant is rivaled only by the origin of fire, right? He's saying that the beauty of it, of how natural that is, the starry night. That's the only thing to compare it to, right?
Now at an organism from alternative environs, a dozen pair of cartoon eyes in a thicket to see a neophyte get sliced in a ribbon.
So it sounds like he's referencing some unknown creature here, and we've seen that, right? I believe the beginning of Jumping Coffins, it's like slow burn crawling, right? And we're like, well, what is this? Is this him, or is he referencing some beast out there? But he said, what did he say? Adding a organism from an alternative environment. And right here, he's saying a dozen pair of cartoon eyes, a dozen pair, right? So it's some creature, it's some monster with 24 eyes. He says to see a neophyte get sliced into ribbons, right? What's a neophyte? Sometimes it's referred to as a neo. I'm a fraternity guy from Northern Illinois University. A neophyte is someone new to the organization. They're a novice, right? They're a freshman. It'd be a neo and a freshman scenario, like your first year in high school, right?
Cartoon eyes in a thicket to see a neophyte get sliced in a ribbon. Some here to pick lice off each other and assimilate.
Ooh, here to pick lice off each other and assimilate, right? You think of like monkeys, right? Monkeys that are eating insects, which are a source of protein, right? And they eat them so they don't get back on their fur, but it's kind of nasty. But he's talking about assimilate, right? Assimilation is the process of an individual, or I guess it could be a group, from different places, right? They could have different, but they acquire the same basic attitudes, right? The same, it's like embracing culture, if you would, right? Assimilation. It sounds like he wants to wild out. He wants to be himself. Wilding out is more urban terminology.
A dozen pair of cartoon eyes in the thicket to see a neophyte get sliced in a ribbon. I'm here to pick lights up each other and assimilate. Duck a suit, troubleshoot his moody user interface.
Ooh, so he says duck a suit, right? He's here to avoid being in the business world or the real world, right? But ducking a suit is also like dodging it or keeping away from it, right? It's kind of funny how he said troubleshoot his moody user interface. Right, troubleshoot. Obviously, there's some wordplay there because troubleshoot from like an IT perspective is like trying to fix something. You could troubleshoot anything, I guess, right? But the wordplay, obviously, on shooting, like shooting off somebody's moody expression or shooting off someone's face. Now, one thing I referenced just from having some context from the business world is I wonder if he liked the wordplay there, or if he's actually referencing the Moody software, right? Because there is something called Moody software that has a user interface. It's a business that provides what's called BI or business intelligence. I've worked with some of that data before. They produce what's called intent data. Well, that's just one part of BI. It's actually quite interesting. If somebody's doing, let's say a business is doing a search for funding, right? They're looking for financing. They're looking for funding options. Well, you can predict that somebody is looking for a certain type of service. And by accessing their records on all different social media sites, search engines, the terms they're looking for in their computers, researching definitions. And then what happens is you get all of this data, and it's huge amounts of data, and it's sold basically to the highest bidder. But with intent data, you might get a managed IT company that purchases intent data. They can tell that you're looking to switch providers. But it's Moody software is something that provides business intelligence data. Now, I don't know if he's actually referencing this use of Moody user interface or just something that played in there, but that's what it is. Each other and assimilate. Duck a suit, troubleshoot his Moody user interface. True and sucker proof. Who to fully disengage. Sucker proof. Vanishing point away from the picture. Ooh. See, he references these. Now we know that I believe he studied at Boston University. It's funny, my mom's family is actually from Boston, or a small town out there, Wareham, Massachusetts. But I believe he went to Boston University and he studied visual arts. And that's where I think he can break down things like the Starry Night or the Praying Hands, or even something like this, right? Or what did he say? He just said, float his only vanishing point away from the picture plane. He's talking about really lines that parallel when you look at like a 3D image, right? But anyway, that's called the vanishing point. A lot of people picture like the trees that get smaller as you go away, and they grow in size as you become, basically how you view the art, right? It's saying that a set of parallel lines, they're going to intersect on something, the vanishing line of that plane, right? It's actually called the horizon, but long story short, it's something that you can tell he studied visual arts. Duck a suit, troubleshoot his Moody user interface. True and sucker proof, who to fully disengage. Float his only vanishing point away from the picture plane. But you could also be talking about getting away, right? Where the radio trails off and people catch rabies on the way to their mailbox. Yeah, he's in the middle of Bufu, right? We used to say that's Egypt, the middle of nowhere, right? Catching rabies on the way to the mailbox indicates, how wild, right? How dangerous the world is around him, and that he's in the wilderness. Trails off and people catch rabies on the way to their mailbox under a sideways rain, cornering the briar, still pull up Mm.
from a hoarded synthesizer.
Ooh, the references. Man, he references these stories that, again, you think are just some, it could be a basic reference, but a lot of times there's a really interesting behind the scenes story there, right? He said, here, let's go back here. What do you say? Under a sideways rain, cornering the briar. Sideways rain, the rain can come on any different form, but there are variations where it feels like it's coming up and coming sideways. Who remembers Forrest Gump, right? One day it started raining. It didn't quit raining for 4 months, right? And he talks about little bitty rain, big old fat rain, and rain that flew in sideways. Briar is just wild bushes. I guess you could say it's specific. It could be like a rose bush, but normally when you talk about thick wildflowers and grass, and if you say briar, it's more of a general term, just meaning like a prickly bush. So he said, under a sideways rain, cornering the briar. So it sounds like he's in the middle of this wilderness, right, where the radio trails off and people catch rabies on. He's in the outdoors, which makes sense knowing what we know about him writing part of this album, right? Still pull a broadsword from a hoarded synthesizer. Now, this can get really in depth, but there's actually a story behind it. I'll help kind of get into that. But many years ago, right, many moons ago, right, but I started reading about alchemy. I don't know if you guys can see. There's actually a little. It's one of the paintings that I have here in my office. You can see the human brain, the breakdown of what certain things were supposedly meant. But when you it basically the material that I was reading with alchemy, it went into depth about yin and yang and what's called duality, right? So in time, yin becomes yang, yang becomes yin, right? The child becomes the parent. The dependent or immature or ignorant becomes the dependent, or a mature wise person, like, right, that cycle of life. But it really goes to the story. Obviously this seems to be a reference to the legend of Arthur, right? Arthur. Arthur. Oh. Right. But it definitely sounds like that's what he's referencing. Most people know the Legend of Arthur. It's a part of British mythology, but really that piece that I was reading about alchemy, surprisingly, I was trying to argue that this whole story is really about the principle of duality, right? The yin versus yang, really as the stone and the sword. Now, the basic story is simple, right? And I think that's what everybody knows. It's about Merlin, right? Where I get my beard idea from. Merlin the magician. He goes down to London's market, and he goes in the middle of the square. He holds his arms up, right? He points to the stars, and he's basically, he sets this big block, the stone, this huge rock, and he sticks this blade in, and there's only really the handle showing, and it basically just has a simple sign on it. It says, whoever pulls out this sword is the true king of England, right? So it's so think about that, right? There's supposed to be this magical test to find out the true king of England. So he pulls this, right? Everyone's trying, everyone fails except for Arthur, right? Because Arthur's already demonstrated his like selflessness, right? And he becomes the king of England. And there's a few misconceptions about the story. I don't always like nitpicking on, what's like legend and mythology, right? But based on the time and the period, the weapon is more than likely not going to be an Excalibur, right? It's more than likely going to be a smaller sword. But in the origin of the story, I believe it's actually an anvil on a rock, and I think the sword is somehow wedged between them. It's not quite what you see in like the modern version of it, but really the whole idea of it is the sword represents the spirit, right? The stone represents matter. So the sword is supposed to represent your mind and logic and how you are able to separate parts from each other, right? Like a sword will separate parts of a body. So it's like the sword of logic, right? The sword of logic allows us to divide good from evil, right? True from false. It allows us to ultimately know things, right? The sword is the cross. It's the symbol of what you call free will. So to grasp the handle is you exercising your choice, right? You choose to attempt to remove the sword, right? So, and again, this goes in depth. I wish I'll try to find a link and share the information, but the sword and the stone represents spirit trapped in matter. So it's supposed to be what's called the human condition, the condition of all life, right? Life is spirit bound in a matter body, if you would. So we are spirit trapped in matter. We're bound here by what he called emotional attachments. And we have this sense of self-preservation, which is like a survival mind. And he says that people actually forget that we're spirits and they think that we're bodies. So matter is the test of the spirit. It goes into like winning a game, remembering who you are, but it's supposed to be liberation from this wheel of incarnation. And it's supposed to get away from the delusion that's matter. So to remove the sword from the stone represents spirit overcoming matter. So there's a lot, and I'm going to try to do some research and put a link down below to the actual story, but really, the gist of it is the sword and the stone symbolize it's like the default state of a human, right? A normal person who cares about material things. The yin mind, right? If you think of that, right? Irresponsible, immature, ignorant, selfish. They're very literal, very. Basically, the immature spirits, they don't have the self-awareness or self-control to be a king. Right? So the immature spirit doesn't perceive themselves as being separate from matter. They only identify the body and its emotions, and they think that that's themselves. Because they can't differentiate between the spirit and matter, they can't separate them in their minds. So they're not able to control themselves, right? They inevitably will become puppets to the world, right? To some ideology or whatnot. Right? There's also like the herd mindset, the mob. The law of the jungle, if you would. But the king is supposedly different. The king is supposed to be, he's an awakened spirit. He knows that his true self is not, it's not the matter, so he can go above it, right? So that's what makes him king. It's becoming conscious. It's waking up. It's having your independence, right? It's understanding your true nature, right? Spirit doesn't die; it doesn't have anything to fear. It's about this self-awareness, right? The king is the self-awareness and the self-control to be spiritually awakened, so he can follow his true will, right? So because he doesn't have attachments to a belief system and ideologies, he doesn't have the delusion of matter. So he sees things as they are. And that's what makes him worthy to be king. I know that doesn't, it's very different, but that is something that I read before and I wanted to share it because, the understanding the concept behind this. And again, that's you're looking at the dual nature of things. But I always thought that was really interesting, and it's not something that was something that's common that you hear, and that's always stuck with me. That how symbolic that story is. But most people just think, oh, he's worthy. But yeah, why is he worthy to be king? What is it about him that makes him worthy? And that's kind of what it breaks down to.
Trails off and people catch rabies on the way to their mailbox under a sideways rain, cornering the briar, still pull a broadsword for my corded synthesizer. Nap in a hole in a tree. Cat leaving bowls at my feet.
A vole is just a little animal. Think of like a little gerbil hamster type animal. So a cat leaving something at your feet, that's your cat. Normally, if it's doing that, it needs some sort of mental stimulation, right? But it has that drive to go after prey. But they're trying to present it for you, right? It's they probably think that we're not capable of doing this ourselves, but it's really sort of thought of as a gift, or at least that's my understanding of it.
In a hole in a tree. Cat leaving bowls at my feet. Master P, memory foam, everything.
Pet Master P. It sounds like he's referencing way back in the day. Master P had it was his turn for what they called MTV Cribs at the time. It was a show that would go to the homes of the rich and famous, right? And the rich and famous would show, oh, look at this, look what I have, look what I've got with my money. Look at all I've become. Well, Master P, he had gold on his ceilings. He had gold trim. He had a gold bathroom. He had a gold toilet. He had gold everything, right? So he's talking Master P, memory foam, everything. Maybe it's because he's out there in the wilderness. That's what he's using. But I think that's the reference with Master P.
Talking Master P, memory foam, everything. Jettison the rest and
let us get rid of the rest. Ooh, roulette. Like, woo. So jettison, we've heard him use that before, right? It normally means just get rid of something. And if he's, what did it say? Roulette is a new trajectory. Spinal Tap 11. I almost didn't. That's why I'm glad we have the lyrics. Spinal Tap 11 is this old movie. This is from the 80s. I think they have two versions of that, but the famous clip, basically the guy, most amps, and I guess this ties in because he was just talking about a synthesizer. Most amps go through from a 1 through 10. Well, they modified it so it goes from up to 11. And I don't think it's an actual modification, but I think it's just a kind of a mind, right? Where you always are playing at 10, thinking everybody's at 10, but they still have somewhere to go to push the limits. So in the video, they go up to 11, which should really be 10. But they're trying to, there's always a way to give more, right? It's kind of the meaning behind it. Tapping resin out the evergreen. I don't know, resins are used for a variety of things, normally as an adhesive. But I kind of get the image of the resin when you're smoking the green, right? That's what maybe that's just saying who I am, but.
Talking Master P, memory foam, everything. Jettison the rest and let us a new trajectory. Spinal Tap 11, tapping resin out the evergreen. Designated dark horse, headless independently.
Oh, a designated dark horse is kind of like the underdog. It's kind of a little known person. Most people always compare it to the racehorse, right? That unexpectedly wins. He's the most unlikely to succeed in life.
Designated dark horse, headless independently. Sidewalks end with ponds and frog eggs. Buried
Yeah,
his very own blurry Sasquatch.
yeah, he's talking about being in the wilderness, right? Sidewalks end with ponds and frog eggs, buried bones. He said he's got his own Sasquatch vids, right?
Walks end with ponds and frog eggs. Buried bones and his very own blurry Sasquatch vids. Led like field ants to a hot lens. Clock kittens versus cobwebs. Fight.
Nice.
Maps won't work here. Ice over bittersweet nightshade. Antlers rise from his migraine. Life strange, how do you identify?
He's talking about shredding, right? He said shred or die.
Migraine, shred or die. Life strange, how do you identify?
And shred or die, isn't that a Tony Hawk game? A skateboarding game? But he's talking about antlers, right? Rise from his migraine. He was just drinking some nightshade. He sounds like he's got a pounding headache, right? But shred or die, he's talking about losing your antlers.
Brain, shred or die. Life strange, how do you identify?
It's basically saying, and you know what? It's funny because again, we're talking about the dual nature, right? Duality. What he was just referencing right here.
Nightshade. Ice over bittersweet nightshade. Antlers rise from his migraine. Shredder die. Life strange. How do you identify? Knew what the matutinal are packaged with the vespertine.
The vespertine and matutinal, right? Who uses those words? It basically means one is like early morning, and one is like it's like dusk and dawn, if you would. That's the simple way of referencing that. I don't know that I've ever used that in a sentence. Actually, you know what? When we talk about the dual nature of things, right? The yin versus yang, it's starting to come up, and I don't think it's a coincidence here. He said, I'm pretty useless till the roof is painted Gemini. It sounds like it's a reference to being in the outdoors, right? Your roof is the starry night, like he referenced. All right, Gemini. He said the roof is painted Gemini. Gemini is considered the constellation of the twins, right? Most people just see Gemini and it's two bright stars. But again, you have to understand mythology. And most of this, it sounds like his references, normally I get Greek references a lot from him. But he's talking about Castor and Pollux, right? These are the Gemini twins. I know this because I happen to be a Gemini just like he is. Somebody actually in the comment section said that he was a Gemini, which I thought is really cool. When I was younger, most people thought it was weird that I was a left-handed Gemini. I actually use both hands when I write on the chalkboard, which is weird, and both hands in sports. But supposedly that meant like you're eccentric or whatnot. But he is a Gemini. But again, we say, what's the concept of a duality, right? We keep seeing this throughout his songs. You think of the word dual, right? You think about having two parts and opposite meanings, right? Think of good versus evil, or flipping a coin, right? Peace and war, love and hate, up and down, black and white, right? These are all dualities. So let's explore the myth behind this, right? He said the roof is painted Gemini. The myth goes that there were two boys, right? Castor and Pollux. They were the sons of a mortal mom, but they had different dads, right? They got this baby daddy or baby mama drama, right? But Castor is the mortal brother, and Castor died in battle. And Pollux started just begging Zeus. I believe Zeus was his dad. But he started begging him to be mortal so that he can die and be with his brother. And Zeus actually grants his request. And that's why Pollux and Castor they're reunited in the heavens, right? It's supposed to be symbolic of like brotherly love. But think about that, right? The Greek myth, it explores the duality of life, right? Mortality and immortality are forever intertwined, right? And you think about that, and again, it sounds like he could just be referencing his roof is painted with the stars. But when we understand what the Gemini means, it brings other meaning, I think, to some of these tracks. Let's let it ride for context.
The roof is painted Gemini that set him free. Eat his own body weight in genocide. Came back a decorated dog of war once more, though he currently stuck in the dog door.
A dog of war used to be considered like came back a decorated dog of war. I'm thinking that this is him coming back to normal life or suburbia, right? A decorated dog of war is like a mercenary. It's meant to be like people that would do work for money, really for the highest bidder, right? Kill or fight.
Decorated dog of war once more, though he currently stuck in the dog door. Dog isn't even his final form, just a period between greenhorn and Hyperion.
Ooh. Just a period between greenhorn and Hyperion. man, you just gotta appreciate the vocabulary and the intellect. I think it makes the listener a better person, right? He's basically saying, like, a greenhorn, if you say somebody's green, it's kind of like saying they're wet behind the ears, right? They're inexperienced, they're gullible. And again, Hyperion, he's referencing Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, that basically means that somebody's like looking down from above, kind of like a god would. So it's like godlike. So again, we see the duality, right? The yin and yang throughout this whole piece. He's talking about the super inexperienced versus being godlike. Sick.
Greenhorn and Hyperion, peering to the eye of a primordial experience.
Primordial is like the beginning, right? The primary experience. It's the earliest, the beginning of time.
Horn and Hyperion, peering to the eye of a primordial experience. Portamento warriors in unforgiving wilderness.
Portamento, I never really heard it used like that. Portamento warriors. I've only heard it in music, and it's normally to describe, when you learn that every good boy deserves fudge, or FACE, and you learn how to read music and you learn how to identify different tones and different notes. And portamento is like, it's a transition, I guess, if you would. So it sounds like he could be discussing the transition between living outside and going back to suburbia, right? Portamento warriors at unforgiving wilderness. Noah's Ark room, borderline ethereal. Ethereal is like something that can be complete, just beautiful, extravagant, exquisite, right? Noah's Ark room tone. So it sounds like he's again talking about being in the wilderness and the beauty of it all.
Borderline ethereal, Noah's Ark room tone. Add a little up, high, down, low, too slow. Found acquaintances a pain to babysit, so we gave away his shit and gave him all the slip. Now hit the ceiling when the wind blows. Fish float belly up, songbirds crash in the windows. Swizzle apple cider vinegar and dish soap. Suicide flies take dips in the kill zone. Still shuffle through a stack of old photos taken before the varicose verified chronos.
Woo! He's taking it next level here. It sounds like he was talking about the transition with going back to suburbia, right? He's leaving the wilderness, but I like what he said. He said, up high, down low, too slow. He's high-fiving someone, right? It's a greeting. It sounds like he said, found acquaintances, a pain to babysit. So he likes being isolated, right? He feels like people you have to babysit, you have to create this conversation with them. He said he gave away his shit and gave them all the slip. Now, you could be talking about the pink slip, right? That means they were fired. And a more urban meaning, when you give someone the slip, is like you get away from them. Man, I slipped from the cops. Hit the ding, 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 right? You slipped away. They left the window slightly down, and you were able to jimmy it, and you gave them the slip, right? So it could be he's getting away from it all. But I like what he says here. He said, now pets hit the ceiling when the wind blows. Fish float belly up. Songbirds crash in the windows. He seems to be back at home after spending time in the wilderness, and things aren't making sense, right? Everything is unnatural. It's limited, right? Pets hit the ceiling when the wind blows. They're getting scared from the most basic of stuff, right? And there's an actual ceiling there. Despite what he referenced it being like, what did he say, a star reference in the Gemini? So think about that. Fish float belly up. That means they're dead and they're still there. Somebody didn't eat them, right? Songbirds crash in the window. So the flow of things is not the same.
Oh, too slow. Found acquaintances a pain to babysit, so we gave away his shit and gave him all the slip. Now pets hit the ceiling when the wind blows. Fish float belly up, songbirds crash in the windows. Swizzle apple cider vinegar and dish soap. Side flies take dips in the kill zone.
That's a natural way to kill pests, right? He's referenced that you apple cider vinegar and dish soap. Supposedly the flies eat it and they die. You put it by your window at your house. Love that because he's referencing how different things are now that he's in suburbia, and the things that make sense didn't make sense before, right? Again, we start seeing these opposites. And look what he's saying here. It looks like still shuffle through a stack of old photos. So he's referencing the time from before. He said, taken before the varicose verified chronos. Now that's deep on a whole other level. So think about that. It's like saying before the weight of the world caught up to him, right? Now you think of varicose, what do you think of? You normally think of varicose veins, right? When you get the swelling and the pain in the legs that comes from age or from using them too much. I really don't know too much about varicose veins, but verified chronos. That's something, again, he's referencing Greek mythology here. So you have to, the Greeks were very different on how they looked at time. So there's two different types of, when you look at like the concept of time, right? There's chronos and there's kairos. And chronos, you probably recognize it for the root word for chronological, right? Or chronicle. Think about it. It's like, how do you quantify time, right? But the Greeks had a second word, the kairos. It's lesser known, but it had a very important meaning back then. Kairos is what philosophers and people refer to sometimes as, it's called deep time. So it's supposed to be this feeling that the world stops entirely. And it's measured not by the ticking of your watch, but in a beautiful sunset, a starry night, looking at a beautiful painting, getting your first kiss by a beautiful girl, feeling a boob, right? Getting a girl's number, having sex for the first time, seeing something that takes your breath away, right? Laughing with your friends, where you start laughing so hard that your stomach hurts, right? So when you find yourself in kairos time, you lose track of chronos time. So it's measured not by the ticks on your watch, but it's measured by the experience itself. So think about that. He says, taken before the varicose verified chronos, right? Actual time. Love it, man, because it creates this different picture. But again, it's so important to understand Greek mythology and some of the Greek breakdowns, because it gives us a better idea as to what he's saying here.
Cider vinegar and dish soap. Suicide flies take dips in the kill zone. Still shuffle through a stack of old photos taken before the varicose verified chronos.
Ooh, love that.
Feels weird. I'd rather feed an apple to a deer.
You'd rather be in the wilderness, right? Ooh, hey shit. It kind of reminds me of Jumping Coffins, which I've been bumping on repeat, right? Voices clawing from the other sides. I think he also ends that one with "What up," right? But again, it seems to be referencing throughout this duality, right? And we see that really throughout. Let me just make myself a little bit bigger here. But we see that throughout this work, right? It's like this division of what's out there versus someone in here, right? We think of the dualities in life and what we experience on the day-to-day basis, and we fail to see it, right? Even when you say something like it's dark in the night, right? You think about that. Think about that, and it's based on what, right? Your understanding about light and day, right? Darkness only exists because there's light, right? There's no meaning of day if there's no night. I feel like I need to smoke a little bit before I hit up some Aesop. But man, his stuff is just so deep, right? It's like he's saying we've been trained to label and categorize things as positive or negative, good or bad, right and wrong. It's become part of our nature, no pun intended. But I love this because he's talking about being out in nature and the things that really what that means. Man, just really impressive piece. I've been impressed with a lot of his work, and I've never been disappointed. But I love the references. the visual art references, the Greek mythology. This one seemed heavy in the Greek, just in the Greek, having an understanding of Greek mythology would really help. But man, really excited about this. We're going to continue getting into his work. If you guys are fans, man, show some love. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to grow this channel, and there's no shooting stars. There's no dancing girls in the back. There's not even a really good intro or outro. We're simply here to break down the music, understand the context, and really dive into and go in depth with what the context might be behind some of his work. We're not paying for subscribers. We're not paying for likes. This is truly an organic build up where we can just openly discuss and really bounce ideas off each other. So as I explore new artists like Aesop Rock, he's new to me, I'm saying. But I love it. I hope you guys are with us on the journey, and we're going to continue to get into some of his work. Check out the folder below, Aesop Rock breakdowns and reactions, and we'll see you on the next video.